Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm going to talk a bit about, hopefully anyway, what we can, there's been a lot of talk today, and probably yesterday, which unfortunately I missed, about this incredible amount of work that's gone into these lovely digitization projects, and some really nice online presences and searchable databases and all those lovely things. But I'm going to try and see if we can squeeze even more out of these objects, these digital objects that are the outputs of all the time and effort and money that's gone into these projects. So, I'm Rory McNicholl. I work at the University of London Computer Centre as part of the Digital Archives and Research Technologies team. These are my colleagues. They're not here, but if without them I wouldn't be, so I thought I'd leave them in there. And our relationship with the Linnean Society is that we have hosted and developed, we developed it first, the Linnean Online since 2007, I think. It might have been 2006 now, I think about it again, yeah, give or take a year. Developed and developing as well, I should add. We are currently working to integrate the welcome player into the site and introduce a bit of faceted search and bring it up to date with some of the nice things that we've already seen today. So this is our view of digitization. So this was put together by my colleague Ed Pinsent, who's an archivist but has a special fondness for digital preservation. And we can see here what I hope people who have been involved in digitization projects already can recognize some of the, if you can see them, some of the processes there, but this sort of lays them out bare. And what I'd just like to draw attention to is the sort of orange spider there in the middle, nine-legged spider, that permeates everything, and that is metadata, and I'll be banging on a bit about that, and its importance for really getting the most out of the digital resources. It's also very important just to notice that quite early on in the project, in that process, near the top is the cataloguing and the database, and of course everything that you see onwards will feed back into that catalogue and that database by various methods, that some of which I'll touch on. But in the end, down at the bottom, we have some examples of the digital objects themselves, and what we want to do at the end of this, in most cases I would assume, is we want to get over that dotted line to the publication stage and get these resources to the user communities. Now, so we start off with a nice image, but what we really want to do is enrich that for our user communities. Now, the user communities I've split into roughly two groups. One group are the humans, which is all of us. That's so for the readers, they want to see human readable content, and they want it to be accessible. So they want to be able to find it, and this is something that obviously digitizing an archived collection can massively improve accessibility, because people can get hold of it from across the world. It can also potentially, if you enrich it in the right way, it can open up accessibility in the to people who might otherwise not have, who might need sort of enhanced accessibility to read and process this stuff. Okay, so amongst the human user community, we also have participants. So these are people who, crowdsourcing, which we'll come on to a bit more. Annotation. So over the years, someone like the Linnean Society, people have turned up here, they've come and looked at the specimens and they've written down stuff and gone away again. Now there's no reason for that not to continue once your objects are digitized. And of course, that means that annotation is in a sense a form of community metadata. It feeds back into the big spider that we saw before. And another thing where you combine the two, you have the reader participant, and these are effectively people who have come to have a look, and they stay to add value. They've noticed something that they can contribute to your collection, and if they're given the right mechanisms, then they can do so, be that with transcription or just leaving a comment or something like that. And all of that enriches the original image that we started off with. Right, so the other side of the user community are the machines. And we want to enrich this data for the machines. And so there's a little bit of a discussion already about search engine optimization, things like schema.org, making your content easily accessible, easily discoverable by the web crawlers that go out there and find stuff. Without doing that right, there's a danger that no one will find the stuff in the first place. Also, harvesting services. So, I was going to say to Stefan that I was going to avoid acronyms, but here comes one. Something like OAI PMH. It's a good 6-letter acronym, which is the Open Archives Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting. Did everyone get that? So, it's quite simply, it's an agreed standard that the metadata can be advertised in, and because it's an agreed standard, lots of other collections, repositories around the world and can harvest the metadata, and this amplifies your data across many platforms and to wider audiences across the world. So what we're talking about here more generally is publishing machine-readable data and metadata to allow this good stuff to happen. Okay, what's the best thing to do? The best thing to do with your data will be thought of by someone else. So this is the other thing that we want to promote here, is that everyone has a limited amount of funding and resources, and the potential. And Rufus Pollock from the Open Knowledge Foundation is obviously a great advocate of open data, and it doesn't mean you have to give all your lovely stuff you've spent money on away. However, if you describe this stuff and open that metadata, there's potential that people can create really compelling sort of views of your resources that you might not have even thought of yourself. And hopefully we'll have a look at some examples of those. So, as you know, I've been working with the Linnean Society for ages. I still don't really understand taxonomy, but I do know metadata standards. One of them is Darwin Core, and if you publish all the lovely metadata that are around taxonomy in this particular metadata format, you can feed it into this thing called Vespa, which is something that was developed in Edinburgh and Napier University, and it gives you a few goes at compelling visualization. Think what is happening here is we have some names of things, and as you go out from the middle of the circle, you have synonyms of that. And I know there was lots of thinking, or there was a question raised earlier about tracking the name changes and things like that, and synonyms. And this is that if you describe Darwin Core is effectively a schema that's been developed specifically for that job, and if you are able to publish your data in that format, your metadata, then you can feed it into this sort of system and get what might be a compelling visualization of that sort of thing. There's also on the over here, I'm not sure about the distribution here. It does relate down to records down here, and then has dates of those records as well. There's another view here, and there we go, and this is it. So alongside in Darwin Core, of course, you can describe geographic information as well, where a specimen was collected. So here, what we're seeing here, 2 specimen databases, and there's actually a comparison done between the taxonomies, and the red stuff here is the matches. So they've compared these databases, and they've said, okay, well, we've got some significantly matching records here. I don't know if that's useful or not, but it looks nice. This is an example of what can be done. This Vespa is an open source project, so it can be downloaded, and with the right sort of technological know-how, it can be manipulated, and the sort of visualizations that make sense for your collection can come out of this. Okay, there's lots to talk about correspondence before, and it was the sort of metadata that the correspondences offer was really beautifully described by the last 2 speakers, and there was some mention by Miranda of future visualizations. So this is something that's out there at the moment from Stanford, and it's so the nice thing about correspondence is that it brings together place, as Miranda was saying, it brings together place, time, people, and of course the documents themselves and all the good stuff in there. And here we see in blue we have Locke's correspondence, and in orange we have Voltaire. I just grabbed this off an example. I don't think they actually wrote to each other, because I think one was dead before the other was born. I'm not sure. But so I don't think any of those lines between Paris and London are actually particular letters. But at the end of each node there is the document itself, or the collection of documents if there's more than one. And then you've got down the bottom here we have the sort of temporal visualization of when they were sent. Obviously this is just a screenshot, so it doesn't give you the full richness, but it's all in there. So again, back to, and I'll be very interested to talk to Miranda further about the sort of schemas that they'll be coming out of her project, or the broader project, I should say, and how to harness it to come up with these sorts of visualizations, because it's something. The correspondence metadata is something obviously that we've worked with here at the Linnean Society, but we haven't really found a nice fit in terms of a schema, so hopefully that's something that we'll be able to do later. Okay, so from correspondence, move on to literature. This is a project out of Edinburgh, and so the corpus here is Edinburgh or Scottish literature. I believe they have text-mined it, and once they've done that, they've pulled out lots of terms, which is something that you can do if you in machine-readable form. And from all those terms, they've identified locations around Edinburgh. And then they've been able to look those up from other data sources, and effectively given them a geographic reference that they can plot onto a map. So what you end up with when you sort of throw all this stuff together, again there's temporal data down the bottom, it's always a bit of an afterthought down the bottom, but it's there, is a map, a literary map of Edinburgh. And it's probably worth noting that on the way for this particular project is a mobile app. So you can imagine you have this, so it's not just a compelling view, but it has the potential for this data to follow you around. You could be drinking in a pub in Edinburgh somewhere, and your app could tell you that that particular pub was mentioned by Walter Scott in one novel and Irving Welsh in another novel. And then you could make of that what you will. But the data is then sort of presented in this compelling form, and potentially something that you could give to visitors to the city and say, well, here you go, make up your own literary walk around Edinburgh, fill in what you're interested in, and we'll filter this data for you and send you there. So, okay. So what we're looking for here with these sorts of with these visualizations is to get away from data and to do some storytelling. This is a really nice example of a very simple tool. Well, it's not that simple. I think it's simple, but it's very simple to use. It's something you can just go and visit yourself, and you can effectively, quite quickly, throw your resources at it, including locational information, and it will, and time, and it will map a nice story, and you can sort of work your way along these nodes. You can give any sort of resource, pictures, videos, references to other web pages. So here we see the sort of the full thing, and then you can, as you zoom in to the map, you're given there's a census image from Flickr, and yeah, again a nice way to present. So you can imagine this sort of thing happening for one of the great journeys of these two chaps up here across the world. Indeed, nipping back, I was just thinking to the sort of correspondence network. It would be lovely to see Wallace's initial letter from somewhere in Australasia to Darwin make its way over on a map, and then to see this explosion of correspondence as Darwin realised he was onto something, or they were onto something, I should say. Right, and all of this leads to the potential for interesting paths to discovery. And this example here, so it's a really simple idea. People digitize images. That in the process of digitizing images, the technical metadata will contain all the colors in that image. So all they've done here, this is the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt, which I believe is a design museum. They have just given you the chance to search by color. So you can tell it a color, and it will go and find you all the images that have that color. It's a pretty simple thing to do, but it's just a novel sort of entry point into a collection. Works well for a design museum, possibly for a manuscript collection. There'll be a lot of yellow, but it's just an example of a different way of approaching a collection. Right, and all of this, all of that stuff that we've just seen, is made possible because the data described and and published using open standards. So I can't stress that enough. Going back to here, back to our nine-legged metadata spider. The sort of there's so much stuff in there, possibly more than anyone can get their head around. But there's so we're starting with all the IP and copyright stuff at the top. That needs to be recorded. There are standards for that. The preservation metadata, I can name a few for keeping that. Then the actual scanning itself will produce lots of technical metadata, which can be really useful. Think of the colors. And then as stuff is edited and manipulated, there's the need to keep the provenance of each little change so that we know who did what when. And then there's the potential. I'm going to go back. I'm going to just The reason this spider has 9 legs is because I added the 9th leg when me and Ed were doing a talk somewhere, and that's the HTR leg at the end. That stands for handwritten text recognition, which is something that me and Tim here have been involved with, and that leads down to the crowdsourcing, but I'll come back to that in a bit. But there's the potential for processing, and again that produces more metadata, and there's as you can see, there's 2 little boxes that involve quality review, and that's a really important process. So when you have OCR, you generally have something that is almost there and needs to be QA before you publish it. For other things, you might want to do the quality review a little further down the line. If you're giving out, if you're inviting people to help you, the crowd, then your quality review may need to happen after they've had a go at it before you actually do your final publish. So I'm just going to skip forward again. Don't know how to go. Can't remember what slide I was on. But, okay. But so we have all this our lovely metadata from this process. So my source data might be incoherent. So it might not be incoherent to the expert, but it might be incoherent to the general public. It might be incoherent to anyone who doesn't understand the language that it's written in. There are various reasons that it can be incoherent. It might be difficult to process, and looking at that, all that means is incoherent to a computer. So it could be on a handwritten text on a yellowing piece of paper that with a spidery hand that with lots of crossing outs. We've seen lots of examples of those today, and we'll probably see more. And the metadata, despite best efforts, can end up being a bit patchy, a bit incomplete, possibly even wrong in some places. Can you trust it? I'd like to hope so, but there are potential for mistakes along the way. So back to that idea of quality review, it's potentially a very costly endeavour. So luckily, there are very serious-minded people out there who just like the little mice from Bagpuss, will fix it for you just because that's what they like doing. And this brings us on to crowdsourcing. So one of the very big players in crowdsourcing are Zooniverse, and they have an awful lot of projects. They started off just doing science data, but I've found something that's I found a biological thing, and this is what they do is they find really compelling ways and simple ways to invite people who don't need to have an awful lot of experience to enrich the metadata that surrounding digital objects. So this is Snapshot Serengeti. So out in the Serengeti there are lots of camera traps. Animals walk past, it takes a photo. There's an awful lot of that happening, and the job of classifying what animal just walked past has been given out to the masses and said, well, help us out, give it a go. Now, obviously, they're not going to be, the people doing this won't be expert. They could, in fact, be school children. However, there's potential to make a real start when you have an awful lot of data that you need to get classified. There's potential to really cut down the amount of expert resource you need. And it's worth pointing out there's also an educational element to this. Because the people who are classifying the animals are learning about them as they do it. I think that's really important, because that can be notion can be applied to most crowdsourcing activities. There's always something to learn for the person who's doing it. So Tim will be talking about this a lot more afterwards, but this is a screenshot of the crowdsourcing platform for the Transcriptorium project. On the left, we have one of Jeremy Bentham's spidery letters. Is that his handwriting, Tim?
No, that's one of his secretaries.
That's one of his secretaries, who also has spidery. Apparently his handwriting's worse. Yeah. So this is quite good. So if we think about the big spidery diagram from before, this has gone through a few of those processes. It's gone through the handwriting text recognition process, and that's given us a bit of metadata, and that's allowed us to identify the line. So I don't know if you can see there, there's a line that's been highlighted, and that that enables. So when this is effectively, I mentioned a transcription crowdsourcing platform. And so this gives us the ability to match what the transcriber transcribes to the line on the image, which is usually quite a sticky problem. OCR does it quite well, but when you end up with handwriting, it can be quite difficult. The other thing that the pre-processing has given us in this case is a body of suggestions of the words and indeed the sentences in this case. So the transcriber has hit tab here and requested some help, and they've been given a list of possible. So this is the example, if you remember, where we had the quality review a little bit further down, because the HTR is not perfect. It's quite a new technology, and it can sort of put its best guess in, but there's some pretty wild mistakes in there, and that's why that you sort of need a further step, an expert or a crowd to step in and to help it out. But you can assist. The outcome is assisted transcription. So it will tell you it's already done the polygon for you there, and it will give you some suggestions that you can choose or not for what the actual transcription is. You can also enrich the metadata further by inserting TEI, which is a text encoding initiative, which will describe elements of design and layout specifically regarding the handwritten text. So where something has been scribbled out, you can say so. And that is that. Right. So, as I mentioned, crowdsourcing enriches the data. The data collected can be structured. So, in a simple form, like the snapshot Serengeti, you're asking for very specific things, and you can give the crowd a controlled vocabulary and ask them to choose and guide them in that, and then you very much know what you're getting. Less so from the transcription, but and that leads into the use of what you're doing is you're using open standards to describe that data, and then that feeds back into the whole process of all this lovely data visualization and all those other reuse activities that are out there. And it's very cheap because people don't get paid to do it. It's not entirely, but it also enriches the crowd because it can be fun. Honest, some people find this fun. Well, I think I find bits of it fun actually. I've had a go at some of the Zooniverse things. I'm a bit simple that way, so I prefer that sort of thing, especially if gamified. So if you make the whole process compelling, it can be really simple things, just like keeping simple point systems. So people get rewarded badges and things like that. They come back and do it again. And as I mentioned before, it's potentially educational for the people who are doing the work. It's not a silver bullet. This free resource does come at a cost. And I think we heard this even where we have earlier where we had a small set of volunteers. There's a whole lot of work in moderating that input, in looking after the community, and doing the quality assurance from their outputs. So, yes, that mustn't be discounted. It's not completely free. But if the sums, I think, well, as Tim will show us in more detail, the sums can be quite favourable. And then, of course, there's the cost of maintaining the platform, which is paying people like me, effectively. So thank you.